Well, hey there, and welcome to episode number 15 of Groove, the No Treble podcast, which you can always find at notreble.com. My name is Mitch Joel. Let's get on with the show. So, who are you and what do you do?
My name's Divinity Roxx. I'm a bass player. I'm an MC. I'm a singer, a producer, songwriter, performer.
And on and on and on.
And on and on.
I'm so frustrated, Divinity. I was at NAMM this year, and we just didn't get a chance to shake hands. It's so frustrating.
There's so many people at NAMM to shake hands with, so don't be frustrated. I didn't get to see as many people as I would like to.
But you're cruising by that famous Warwick booth, and I'm like, there she is. I should just go over. And you're like, she looks busy. We'll keep going. We'll come back. Never happens.
All good.
Yeah.
All good.
I'm so fascinated with the work that you do and the art you put into the world, in particular because everyone that I typically think of as an archetype of people in this space, it's like they were 4 years old and they were a prodigy, and you sort of go through this, and you read your history, and I wouldn't say you're a late bloomer, but you started playing bass in university. I mean, you were 20 years old when you were like, I'm going to try this thing out.
Yeah, I say I'm a late bloomer.
Oh, do you? Okay, good. Yes. So that's kooky to me. Like, what happened?
I don't know, I have no idea. Maybe it should have been introduced to me when I was younger. My uncle actually played the bass in a little band that he had with his friends, but nobody ever thought, hey, would you like to do this, kiddo? Even though I used to sit on the steps of the basement and just listen to the band, listen to them play, nobody ever thought to put an instrument in my hand. I think if I were a little boy, somebody probably would have thought to put an instrument in my hand. But when I got to college, I was just hanging out with some friends, and it just was a casual conversation. Why don't you get a bass guitar? Okay. And I did it, and I fell in love. It's one of those things.
But you get this instrument, and I know a lot of us when we first pick it up, we're like, it's got to be easier than the guitar because there's two less strings. It's sort of a default thing we take on. But then you explore it and you realize the complexity of it and what it is. And listen, as someone who started playing when I was 12 years old, I remember being intimidated. And again, the first time I heard Jocko, first time I heard Stanley, and I could go on and on. Did you deal with those things too, or were you like, this is bigger than the instrument, it's about me and my musician and my artistry, so I'm not going to focus on that level of intimidation, again considering the fact that you're past your teens and you're an adult already?
Well, I didn't know any of that stuff. I didn't know that I should have been playing when I was a kid when I picked up the bass. I didn't have any preconceived notions about the bass versus the guitar, or where I was in my musical journey and how I fared against other people. It wasn't until other musicians began to introduce artists like Victor Wooten to me that I began to think, oh man, I'm never going to be able to do that. I'm never going to be able to be that. I remember, in particular, a really, really good friend of mine who was a guitar player, and he was a really good guitar player who I would call with every single question I could think of about music. I would read a lot and buy a lot of books and listen to a lot of conversations, and people would talk about there were these terms that I didn't know what they meant, like a mode. I remember calling him when I read something about a mode, and I'm like, dude, what is a mode? And oh, there are more than one? And he used to just laugh at me. And he's like, you know what, kiddo, you're going to be all right because you're so curious. And he's the one who gave me that Victor Wooten CD and said, okay, so now that you've picked up the bass guitar, you need to listen to this. And I was thinking, what are you trying to do? Ruin me? But I just kept going and ironically ended up touring with Victor.
It's a crazy. Yeah, so we're going to talk about that because that's also a story of what I would, the best definition I can think of in one word is chaos. So we're going to get back to chaos. But you mentioned it earlier that, and I found that really interesting. There you are sitting on the steps exposed to it, and nobody threw the instrument into your hand. They probably would have if you were a boy. And it's a funny world where you and I are actually of similar age, and I grew up in a world where, thankfully, that whole thing of like, I remember I was working for a woman and someone said to me at a Chamber of Commerce meeting, like, what's it like working for a woman? And it actually like knocked the air out of me because it was never in my psyche of like, oh yeah, there's like, even in my selection process, I'm like, well, there's a female. I never had that. I never had that with sexuality, with gender, with race. Like I really, people are different, but I never saw that as more than other. And yet you're in a genre with the bass where there aren't a lot of women as well. It's a strange thing.
Well, it's funny because I say now that there are many
way
women
more.
playing bass
we got
guitar.
way more
Absolutely.
now, for sure.
When I picked up the bass, no, there were not many. There were not as many. And I have to say that when I picked up the bass guitar, Michelle Ndegeocello was becoming pretty popular.
She was, yeah.
And not just her bass playing, but her music in general and what she stood for and her rebellion. And I was really into that. It was really a cool time in music for me because it was really soulful and funky, and there was Outkast and Raphael Sadiq and all this there was this new soul movement happening.
Are you talking about early 90s or late 80s?
Early 90s,
so
mid 90s. Hip hop was
the
golden era of hip hop music and soul and neo soul and poetry and just this free expression. So she was definitely somebody I looked to and was like, wow, she's doing this and that, and that's amazing. And we were so different because my background was as a rapper, just a straight rapper. And I had these two personalities, this rap personality and this bass personality. And I just eventually over time began to merge the two and really use the bass as a tool to get out my message.
But part of Michelle's ascent, I felt, was the anomaly of it because it was so strange, right? Like there was that there was a look for sure and a style and a flair, but there was also just the singing, the bass playing. There were so many things going on that, again, we had not seen.
Absolutely. And her message, and she was openly gay, and she talked about it, and she was so pro-black, and she talked about things on record that people hadn't talked about in a long time. So, every time Michelle was playing somewhere, I was there for sure.
So what was your musical evolution like? Because I feel like you had the foundation of music when you were in university, and I feel like the bass was like this natural thing that you picked up where you sort of realized there's a voice for your art to come out of in this, but you're still evolving it at a time that I'm sure in your brain you're like, I want this to move a little bit faster now because I'm figuring it out now. It's university, I got to dance, right? Or not so much.
I've never thought about it like that.
Cool.
It really was a very natural evolution. I never really forced myself to I just had no concept of what it was like to be a professional musician, or, I just didn't put those pressures on myself. I was really just trying to be creative and trying to make the music that I wanted to make be meaningful and have a place in the world. So as I was playing the bass though, and I'm going out as a bass player, I used to play at these poetry jams. People in the audience would see me and they were like, aren't you Divinity, MC Divinity? And I'm like, yeah, I'm that's me. And they would be like, oh, I didn't know you played the bass. Or somebody who would have seen me at a poetry reading playing bass behind poets would somehow find themselves at a hip hop show in Atlanta and say, wait a minute, weren't you playing bass at this show? But I wouldn't have a bass yet with the raps. I would just be on stage with my group rapping, and they were like, but don't you play the bass? And I'm like, yeah, I play the bass too. So I just really, within that, started thinking, oh, maybe I should probably start trying to write songs on bass. Okay. Because when I picked up the bass, it was more than just picking up the bass. I really wanted to be involved in making music, making my own music. I wanted to make my own beats because when I got a bass, I also got an MPC. Well, a year later, I got an MPC 2000, and I convinced my dad to buy that for me and a keyboard. And I learned how to MIDI them up together and start making beats and making a lot of noise.
I'm nerding out here. I'm good with this, Divinity. We're good.
My uncle gave me a Tascam 4-track. So after my gigs, I would come home. I was living with my dad. It was just the two of us because I had dropped out of college. And I had this little corner in the living room on the floor with this MPC and this Tascam and these tapes and all these wires and this bass and this keyboard. And I would just sit there and try to make music with that. It wasn't for anything except that I wanted to express myself.
There's something in you that you were really feeling, and it feels to me like the bass became almost like a nice trigger to really bring out that music in you a little bit.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The other thing that I found really interesting about your journey, and I'd love your perspective on this, is I feel like I wouldn't say like a love-hate relationship with school, because you just mentioned that you dropped out, but you kept going, like you went back. Like
I did.
It's not like, people hear like, oh, I dropped out because I'm going to be a musician, but you actually really, you do believe in education. And I know, we'll talk a little bit about Victor for sure, but you went to his base nature camp. That was school.
Absolutely, absolutely. My mother always taught me that education was what was going to propel you forward. I mean, I was always an A student. I enjoyed school. I enjoyed reading. I enjoyed writing. Going to Berkeley was amazing because of, it was a feat for me to have gotten into the University of California at Berkeley, and it was challenging, and I was so into just every day we had so much to read and so much to write and so many different ideas being passed around. And I was studying with June Jordan, who was a poet. And I was part of her student teacher poetry. She actually taught poetry, and I was a student teacher poet. Mm. And I come from a line of educators. My sister's a teacher. My great grandmother was a teacher, So education and school have always been an extremely important part of my life. So dropping out was not an easy decision. It wasn't something I'm like, okay, I'm just going to leave now.
I got it. Yeah.
No, I really, really battled with myself about that and whether or not it was the right thing to do. And even to this day, I think about going back to school. Very often, I think about it. Even actually right now, in this moment, in this time in my life, I've been thinking about going back and getting that degree.
What degree?
A degree in music now.
In music
I think,
now. Okay.
Yeah, I was going to be a journalist when I was at UC Berkeley.
I won't hold that against you. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. But I've been thinking really seriously about a degree in music.
What do you think what do you think, is it about the degree because of the pedigree of your family, or is it more about the process of going back and sort of getting into the books and the being around that environment?
I think it's both. I miss that environment. I mean, I just enjoy being in an environment where I can learn. I love to soak in knowledge and to be exposed to different ways of learning. Right now, like if I want to go, if I research something or it's coming from me, but to have ideas that are presented to me from other places, just, it invigorates me. So I think it's a little bit of both.
I've heard you say in interviews that you're hip hop at the core, but yet you'll describe yourself as ghetto rock, which, by the way, I'm in love with that. So I'm running with that one with you. Is there, and I say that because I think about the sort of parallel of the music you play, who you're asked to play with, what you do, the persona you create, the content you put out into the world, and I feel like there is a depth to you that as an artist has a very big interest in genre bending and like really seeing how instruments play with styles and how technology might play with something else that I don't know if I feel so sort of dominantly from other what I would call bass players.
Yeah, I think it comes from my hip hop background. It's funny that you say that because Steve Lawson and I have been experimenting with a project.
We love Steve.
Yeah, I love Steve. He's so amazing. I went to the London-based guitar show, and Steve and I got a chance to hang out, and I don't know how this even happened. Oh, I was traveling. Every time I travel with my computer, usually a little MIDI keyboard, maybe an Akai MP. Like right now, I'm carrying around an Akai MPK Mini. Use Pro Tools. Battery is one of my favorite programs, drum program, and I use Logic a lot. So I'm always traveling with a mini studio and a bass guitar, of course, and I usually have an interface. So I was traveling with these things, and Steve and I set up together to play some bass, and he was like, why don't you hook up your computer and hook up all your stuff, hook up everything that you do. So I was like, okay, cool. So I hooked up everything, and he started playing, and I started playing, and I'm looping some of the stuff that we're playing, and I'm on the mic, looping some of my VI, just looping cool things on vocally, and then I'm starting to play beats over what he's playing and looping those things. And he was like, whoa, what is all of that? I'm like, what do you mean? This is what I do. And he's like, yeah, but nobody knows that that's what you do. And I'm like, yeah, it's kind of like back to that same thing. People who know I play bass didn't know I rap. People who know I rap don't know I play bass.
But there's also a community of people who would know that, there's 2 soul albums, the third one's coming very soon. But again, there's still a greater audience that still hasn't been exposed to you because, again, I still feel like it's, as long as you've been doing this, it's still early on.
I still feel that way too, man.
Oh, that's good.
It's funny because this album, I think that I just finished, called I'm Possible, is probably the album that would pretty much, I can pretty much share every aspect of myself in this album. I think it's the most personal album I've ever created. I'm doing everything that I do and that I love to do. I'm expressing myself on this album doing that. I've produced a lot of the music. I made a lot of the beats on my MPC, and man, I mean, I wrote all the lyrics, other than songs that I've guested some artists on. And it's funny because I really feel like this is the record that would help the world get to know who Divinity Roxx is in all of my, every aspect of myself.
Why now? What was that sort of catalyst for you to say, I'm going to take it to this level? Was it the part of the journey, or is there sort of something in you that was like, this has to happen?
I think it's just part of the journey, honestly. My last album, it's so funny because the Ghetto Rock album really was, if you had been in Atlanta in the early 90s, or I guess mid 90s, early 2000s, when I was really out there doing my thing before the Beyonce gig, that's what you would have gotten. You would have gotten all of that out of me. The rock and the hip hop and just the super aggression. I was young and I was just really in love with performing and just balls to the wall, just craziness. But what happened was I got the Beyonce gig, and for 6 years, that was my focus, was the Beyonce gig. So everything that I had been doing up until that point sort of stopped, and it was all about my new identity as Beyonce's bass player. So the identity that I had created before as this I only rock hip hop, this ghetto rock persona sort of fell to the wayside. So when I was finished with the Beyonce gig, I tried to reinvent myself as what I was before, and really try to re-inject myself into the musical world as the Divinity Roxx, the ghetto rock, rah-rah, person. But I knew that it wasn't right. And I knew it when we released the album. I knew it. I was like, this isn't the album I want to make. And I actually, with the collaborators, the people that I was collaborating with, I kept saying, this isn't the record I want to make, guys. And they were like, yeah, but you have these songs and you really should record them and they're really great and you really have to put them out. You really should do it and you should do it now. And so I went along with that. And then the band broke up. My father passed away. Everything sort of fell apart, and I was forced to face this new person who had emerged from all of that, from the Beyonce gig, from my father passing, from all these life changes. And I think that finally after everything calmed down. It took me a few years to calm down and actually sit down and write this record. And I think it was just time.
And it wasn't that long. I mean, the Roxx Box Experience was 2012, so it's not like we're talking like 15 years ago.
No, it was 3 years, but it was a lot that happened.
It's a lot of 3 years. Yeah, it's a whole lot of 3 years, I mean, for sure. So I'm interested in something you said, because when you were doing the Beyonce thing, and you alluded to this sort of, I put it by the wayside, you were that dedicated to it? Like, you were just like, oh, my whole thing is like, you weren't working on your stuff at all during those 6 years?
Yeah, I was working on it, but it was intense, man. We were gone. We were gone.
Yeah.
You know, we were gone a lot. We did not have much downtime in those 6 years. I mean, we're talking about the hardest working woman in the business. So when we weren't, on tour, we were rehearsing for TV shows overseas or getting ready for the next tour, which involved a bunch of rehearsals. We might have 2 or 3 months downtime, but you can't really get back into who you are as an artist in 3 months. But
there's also that perception of, we're sitting around all day waiting for the gig. It feels like there was an intensity and speed to it that wasn't that.
Yeah. I mean, even if you are sitting around and waiting all day for the gig to happen, you're in that environment and that's what you're waiting for.
Right.
I used to take my studio on the road with me. We made beats on the bus, and but it was difficult to be truly creative in that environment, and really put out a project. You
talk about how for that Beyonce gig, you auditioned for it. You were really pushed by some friends, like, try it. And I don't know if you've ever told this story, or maybe I didn't pick up on it. I'd love to hear it from you. Here you are. You are building this thing. You are building this brand. You are building this genre of music. You have a vision for it. You go to audition. You go through it. You win the audition. You become a huge part of that life from 2006 to 2011. You come back and do your own thing. You're doing your own thing. There's a strange balance going on there of the solo artist, this person trying to do something as a bass player too, to supporting somebody who is doing the work that I guess in your brain you would always be doing. It's strange. It was strange, believe me.
And it was tough. I really had to put myself aside.
It becomes submissive a little bit, right? Like
a lot of it. The Beyonce gig was the first gig where I really understood what it meant to be a bass player. I remember having that realization as I'm standing there, and I was thinking, I'm just the bass player. I'm a bass player. I had never thought of myself as a bass player before, but that gig.
That was the gig.
That was the one. It was the biggest gig to have in the world, and I learned what it meant to be a bass player on that gig. So it was really, and it was tough. I mean, the solo was great. When Beyonce gave me the opportunity to take a solo on her tour, that was the solo artist in me expressing herself as much as she could with just the bass guitar. Of course I wanted to rap. Of course I wanted to do a song. I wanted to sing. If you watch closely, you would see my lips moving as though I was performing in front of that audience. But I didn't have that opportunity. I had the opportunity to step out as a bass player. And even today, it's funny now because when people ask me, what do you do? The first thing I say is I'm a bass player.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, Divinity, because if you're going to say, I was self-acknowledging myself as a bass player on that tour, I feel like because of the body of work that you create and what you put out, that you don't necessarily want to be, you want to be, a musician. I want to be an artist.
Yeah.
It just so happens that there's one of the conduits of it is this bass guitar thing that I got here.
Yeah, that's exactly how it is.
But that's really strange because you're self-actualizing as a bass player. It's sort of how we'll call it the masses know you. You're on Oprah, all that sort of stuff. And then, so are you in like reconstruction mode post that, or is it more like catching where you were leaving it off type of thing?
I'm just kind of trying to figure it all out.
Yeah.
I mean, I love playing the bass guitar, and it takes me picking it up and getting lost in it to remember how much I love it. But I also love making beats, and I also love writing songs. And, you know, I also love fiddling around with different technologies and putting stuff together and taking things apart. And I love to write, but the bass was, the Beyonce gig happened at a time when I was really broke. I was really trying to be this artist, but I was broke, and it was as though nobody was getting what it was that I was trying to do, with the rock and the hip hop. I actually even had Ron Fair from A&M Records say to me, "You're ahead of the curve." This was way before the Beyonce.
A&R people love saying that, though, Divinity. Come on.
I know. It's annoying.
Yeah, it's annoying, exactly.
It's so annoying. And I was working with so many incredible people, and what I was doing was just so, I don't know, it was just so out of the box. Yeah. Now, if I was doing that now at that age, I think people would be like, wow, this is spot on. You're right in the right time right now.
Mm. So part of that is the artist's journey, right? Like the stars don't always align when we have a vision for what isn't out there that we want to create.
Absolutely, man. We'll see when these stars align.
No, go on. You were going to say something.
I was going to say the stars definitely aligned for me to be able to create this album, though. Yeah. This album, it was really divine how it all came together. From everything from the studio that we recorded it in, to the musicians I recorded it with, to the fact that I actually have a place to stay in New York. We're in the process of moving to New York, and we ended up recording the album in New York. And I was so resistant to moving to New York, but everything sort of just opened up when I let go of that resistance, and it was just sort of, it was perfect.
People who are going to hear this podcast, this show, are going to be really happy to know that there's a song called "Can It Be So Hard" with Victor Wooten.
Yes, Victor.
So I feel like there's a full circleness sort of coming here, happening in this moment where, you go back to 2000. There are certain things that happened when you went to his base camp that put you on a path for sure, I think, right?
Absolutely. If Victor hadn't have asked me to go on tour with him, I have no idea how anybody would have known who I was as an artist, as a bass player, or I just have no idea how it all would have played out. So
you knew that he was going to play on this album? It was a conversation. What did you want for that song, and why him? Because of who you are as a bass player, too.
Well, I'm definitely no Victor Wooten.
Who is? But let's go down the road, shall we?
Yeah, let's just be honest about that. I wanted Victor on the first album, but it just didn't happen. There was no song or anything. We talked about it. I probably sent him something and he played on it, but we didn't use that song. I can't even remember what it was. But this album, I definitely wanted to have Victor Wooten, his presence, and like you said, it was like a full 360. To have the master bless me once again. For this song, it's really funny because this song, Can It Be So Hard, I'd been working on it for a while, and after I'd finished the second verse and the chorus that comes after it, I didn't know what was going to happen, and I didn't know what was going to happen to that up until it actually happened in the studio and it was finalized. I did send Victor a rough copy and said, "Hey, Vic, man, would you put I really want you on this album. I don't know when I'm going to put it out." I think I sent him a text and said, "Victor, how much would it cost to have you record on my album?" or something like that. Like that. And he was like, "What? What do you mean? How much will it cost? Just send me the track." So I sent him the track and he sent back, I told him where I wanted him to solo. And he just sent it back to me, and it was awesome, and it was perfect. But I sat it on my drive for months, and I wasn't sure if I was going to use it and if that was going to work for the part and what was going to happen. I didn't like what was happening before, but we ended up just creating this moment in the studio. And I was like, hey, let's import Victor's solo right there. And we did, and we just all sat back and said, yeah, that's it. So it was magical.
So this album, I'm Possible, as it's coming to, I guess, its completion, it's going to be launched soon. Tell me what it is to you now, based off of you told the story about really finding you in the journey to create it. But now that it's coming to an end, that and you're putting it out in the world, what's the story on it?
Man, to me, the story is that this quirky little girl from Atlanta, Georgia, who did not play the bass as a child.
We've made that clear, I think. We've beaten that horse. Yeah.
Who had no idea that any of this would ever happen in my life. This touring with one of the biggest superstars in the world and playing behind some of the most prominent artists in the world and playing with some of the best musicians in the world, you know, and writing these songs that are to the left of center and who doesn't seem to fit into anybody's genre or anybody's classification of what hip hop is or funk or rock or soul is, you know, I am possible and the music that I create is possible. And I want to encourage people out there that they are possible. And, you know, the thing about the word I'm possible or impossible, the thing about the word impossible is that I'm possible is staring you right back in the face. You know, we were in France. I remember we were touring and we were in Paris and everything we tried to do, you know, whether it be ordering food or I don't know, whatever, we kept saying, that's not possible. That's what the French kept saying. It's not possible. It's not possible. It's like, well, how come it's not possible? Why not? You know? And I thought about that when I thought about this word impossible, being told over and over again that it was impossible. But it actually is. And that's how I feel about it.
What do you think people who hear it are going to get from it? What type of, how are you, when you have to sit down with those boring journalists who ask you, tell me what it sounds like, or your friends are saying to you, what does this sound like?
I don't think I'm going to have to explain it because
shut up and listen, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, you know, listen to the album, listen to the music. It's really musical. It's really personal. Lyrically, it's extremely personal. It's really giving you a glimpse of who I am and not the persona or the person that you see when I'm out and about or the person that you see on stage, but it's about the person that you don't know and the person in who I am in my quiet moments, who I am when I sit in front of this computer, in front of this computer screen with my keyboard and my bass guitar and my drum machine and quiet down and start to write. That's who you're going to see when you listen to this album. I think people will be able to relate to it.
I don't think the general public can understand the complexity and difficulty it takes to play bass and actually rap at the same time. I really have a massive respect for the work that you do. What is it about that combo for you? Is it natural? Is it a lot of hard work? Because I know a lot of people, when they see you, it's like, how does she, like, people who really know music are like, how does she do that?
It's both. Sometimes it's really natural. It's rhythm. I love rhythm. I've always been in love with it since a child. And that's part of rapping. You know, rapping, part of what makes a really good rapper is how they use words and rhythm, how you intertwine words and rhythm. And I think that adding the bass to that, you know, you just get a whole another layer of complexity. But I don't know. Sometimes it depends on how I write songs. If I'm writing with the bass and lyrics at the same time, then it comes natural. But if I write lyrics without the bass or the bass without lyrics, then it becomes complex because then I have to learn how to spit the rhyme over the bass line.
But are there moments where you're sitting in that thing going like, how am I going to do this? Like,
yeah.
Okay, good.
Absolutely.
I just want some solace that it's not easy.
Absolutely. Even with Can It Be So Hard, you know, I have to slow down some moments and really, really focus on some things that catch me, you know. Even when I do Rapper's Delight, for instance, there's always one part I always get caught up on rhythmically with the lyrics and the bass line. So I have to continuously work on that. And if I'm not working on it and I try to pull it out, out of the blue at a club, and I'm like, dang, and thinking in my head, dang, why'd you do that? Because you know that part is coming.
Getting ready.
So
It's like you're going to trip, right?
yeah, you know you're gonna trip up on this part, man. So why did you pull that out? But I push through it usually.
If I think also about the trajectory of your career, and I respect so much the fact that you really do embrace the artist and the musician and the songwriter, there is the bass part, meaning there is the sponsorship deals, there is the pictures and the magazines, there is the NAMM shows and the lineup, and it's Divinity Roxx, and there is that part of it. What is it about the bass for you today, being in the position you're in now, not being the person who started late and came to it, but like now where you are on those postcards and in those magazines too? What is it about the bass in particular for you now with that?
I'm still that person who started late. I'm still that person who feels like there's so much further I can go with this instrument. Who wants to be so much better, and who practices and is always trying to be a better musician and a better bass player overall. I mean, it's cool, it's Warwick is amazing. I'm playing Warwick basses and playing their amps and, playing DR strings and all that stuff is really cool. But at the end of the day, it's really about being a better player, and what am I going to bring to bass playing? How am I different from other people who are doing this? And I think that that's what keeps me motivated and keeps me going. It's not about being in magazines. Yeah, that's really cool. But it's about whether or not people are listening to the music that I'm putting out.
But it's a strange place to be where on one hand, it's the grasshopper and we're going to learn and we're going to empty the cup and be that sort of Zen. I'm always the student. But on the other hand, you are being asked to like stand up and give a seminar at Divinity and go. And there's a balance between those two.
I'm still a student when I'm giving a seminar.
You're very healthy. Really I like that, Divinity.
I'm always nervous about giving seminars. I don't feel, I used to have to call Anthony Wellington, a really good friend of mine, and say, yo, they want me to give a clinic. What am I going to talk about? What do I have to talk about? What do I have to offer anybody? What do I have to teach anybody? I don't feel like I have anything to teach anybody yet. Haven't learned enough.
Like I said, I think you're very healthy. I like this. So talk to me also about the state of the industry and how you feel it. Because again, we're from very similar generations. And I know that when I speak to people who are either much younger than me, they can't really appreciate what you and I grew up with in terms of the transition from vinyl to cassette to 8-track to CD to stealing to iTunes to I think people of our ilk really went through the spectrum and saw it because we're not digital natives. We remember the world without the internet and computers and stuff like that. On the other side, the older generation obviously really struggles with what the music industry looks like today. And I don't know, I sort of feel like it is a new era. I mean, I'm thinking about things like Pledge Music and streaming services. And I know from a financial structure, it's very difficult for musicians. But on the other hand, from an ability for an artist to truly find their audience and build that direct relationship with them and do things like Pledge Music or whatever it might be, Kickstarter, it can be profoundly life-changing and be very beneficial towards them.
Absolutely. I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day about, before you had a cell phone or a beeper and you would have to use a payphone or have to wait for somebody to call you and leave a message on your answering machine, which
you have to go home to check your email.
Yeah,
forget that.
So yeah, I mean, as technology evolves, it just evolves any industry, and the music industry is definitely one that has evolved. It's weird because I am part of that, that aspect in that time when it was about finding a record label to put your stuff out and
or being found, right? Having someone find you.
And yeah, absolutely, man. Now you just really have to learn how to engage with your audience and find them online and keep them interested because everybody and everything is vying for their attention. So, we did a Pledge Music campaign for this album, which was extremely helpful in getting it done. If I hadn't have done it, I probably would not have been able to finish recording this album. the industry is changing. It's really in the artist's hands. You really have more power and control over your own career. Still, though, there are the gatekeepers and there are the companies that are bigger and can do more and can, create a larger audience for you and expose you to, huge numbers of people that you can't expose yourself to unless you have the budget for that. So it's just it's an exciting time, man, and just learning how to navigate through all of this and there's a wealth of information and people's attention spans are so short because there are hundreds and thousands of artists millions of artists in the world. Why do people want to listen to you?
It's crazy too if I think about your life, because when you were with Beyonce 2006, 2011, it really was also coming to a head. So when you talk about that sort of next level, it's easy to talk about and go, well, they had A&R, but you were in the middle of it. Like you saw what happened when you are, that sort of the massive hit versus the long tail of it.
Yeah.
Which is, it's sort of an interesting thing to live through, I guess, as an artist thinking about your thing, because you're in the middle of seeing like, well, power actually is power too in that moment.
Oh, dude. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the everybody talks about, oh, you don't need a record label.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but the reality is that it wouldn't for anybody. A record label just has the resources and the ability to overnight expose you to places that you never would have had the type of exposure to.
And it's not just that. I mean, I published 2 books on the largest book publisher in the world, and the same thing. I could have self-published. It's not the same as when you sit down in Manhattan with the world's largest publisher and they go, here's what we're going to do to push this book, and they do it.
And they do it, exactly. They do things, that you just don't have the resources to do, and it costs a lot of money to really promote an album the way that it properly. I would just say properly. To properly promote a new album, it costs a lot of money.
But before we cut out, I'm curious about just the evolution of the bass, because here you are, you picked it up at 20 years old. You've been in the bass world during what I consider to be the most transformative time, where the playing styles have changed. As you said, the gender, way more women, thankfully, more equality in that, more strings. We have more technology.
More strings, that's true.
we have there's so different, like the styles of playing have evolved as well. How do you feel the instrument has evolved when you look at it from your perch?
Oh man, I mean, all you got to do is go on YouTube and you see
crazy. Yeah, it's crazy.
Has evolved. Yeah. I mean, sometimes I'm looking like, really, you're doing that with the bass now? Like, I'm just gonna stay over here and keep doing this because that is incredible. I mean, look at somebody like Victor, though. He is. And what he's done alone with the bass guitar, and how he's inspired the next generation to take it even further. I mean, I just think that everybody thought, nobody knew that with 4 strings you could do so much. Everybody thought, oh, let me play bass because it's easier than playing guitar. But if you really want to be considered a bass player, there are now some things that you have to be able to do that I don't think you had to necessarily be able to do before.
Yeah, I think it's also an instrument that's actually finding its own voice outside of being that sort of place between guitar and drums.
Yeah, I mean, but come on, man. The bass is the soul of the band. Everybody knows that.
We all know that, yeah.
Everybody knows that.
I can't thank you enough for the time. Thanks so much, Divinity. Let people know where they can find all your amazing stuff online. All
right. I'm all over the place online. I'm on. I actually have my own website, divinityroxx.com. That's DIVINITYROXX.com. I'm on Twitter at DiviRoxx, DIVIROXX. I'm on Instagram at DiviRoxx.
Great on Instagram. Love the Instagram.
Yeah, Instagram is fun. You just have to throw up just crazy pictures. I'm also on Facebook under Divinity Roxx. I have a fan page. If you get a chance, all you have to do is just click like, because that helps out a lot. And I think that's about it.
Thanks so much for your time, Divinity.
Thank you, Rock Man. I appreciate you.